I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on November 1st, 2023 at 7 p.m. I am Linda Lukowski, Chair of the School Committee. I would like to welcome everyone here tonight. As a reminder, this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community, we're united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners. Students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? The next item is the chairperson's remarks, and because of what happened last week in Maine, I'd like to thank Brian and his team for making sure that our students got home safe from Newbury and from Salisbury. I know it was traumatic for people, but it was nice to know that our kids were home safely. So I'd like to thank them personally. The next item is oral communications from the public. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda item will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the committee? Seeing none. The next item is the consent agenda. The consent agenda does not contain any donations or field trips this month. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The next item is the student representative report. Our student representative, Andrew Doherty, is now going to provide us with his report.
Good evening, everyone. I'll get right into it. So being the start of November, as typical, the student body around Triton has been very busy recently. Fall sports are beginning to finish up, and just like to say a big thank you to the coaches and staff who supported the teams throughout this whole season. And a special thanks to our new music teacher, Mr. Kemp, and the Triton High School Band, as they brought back the pep band to perform at all the games. And as a player on the, throughout the fall season, it's been really supportive having people show up and like playing, getting into our games. And we're looking forward to them playing during our winter season. So that's been a real positive change in Triton so far. Additionally, coming up this month, the Triton Drama Department will be performing the Frozen musical, representing the state of Massachusetts as the only school being able the rights to perform this, which is pretty amazing. And the dates will be on November 17th, November 18th, and as well as November 19th. And we're looking forward to seeing all the hard work Ms. Safley and the students have put into this performance. And more information regarding this event will be shared later by Ms. Safley and also on the Triton website. This past weekend, this Triton Student Council had finished their Triton Haunted Halls. And this is a great event sponsored by Ms. Bolio. And basically it's a haunted house throughout the halls of Triton and the field, the trail that runs to the marsh. And the main point of these events is that we're looking to have the student body become more engaged with these events and fostering community. Because we find that the more students are involved with these activities, the less likely to disrespect our building. And we feel that the more students are engaged with these activities, we can stray away from like the incidents we've had in the past years with issues with the bathroom, vandalism, and stuff like that. But we're looking forward to what we can do next year. And I'd like to say a big thank you to all the teachers who showed up and we got to scare them. That was a lot of fun. I was a clown in the marsh. That was a lot of fun. Oh, very scary. Immediately following this, the conclusion of Haunted Halls, the Student Council is looking again to perform the homecoming duties. And even today, all the students showed up this morning at 7:15. And they're all working really hard to make sure that they can implement it with as little staff involvement as possible. And we're just looking forward to like more opportunities for the students to become involved, boost their school spirit, and just build a better community, a community that we respect our building, respect our bathrooms, and appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into making sure we have a safe place to use the bathrooms and eat in the cafeteria. So we're looking forward to that. So a lot of things good on the horizon, and thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions? Andrew? Thank you, Andrew. The next item is the VPA Program Coordinator introduction. I want to thank the group of individuals who helped select the new Visual and Performing Arts Coordinator for their work last spring, and I'm going to turn this to Brian.
So just by way of introduction, Natalie Safley is our theater teacher, currently director of Frozen, the Broadway musical. And so you haven't had you may have had an opportunity. She has never formally been to the committee, so we thought it'd be a great time to have her come spend 5 minutes, introduce herself, say a little bit about a really cool program that's going to be going on here shortly. So Natalie.
Hello?
Is it green?
I don't know. Where's the button? It's green. Okay. I can project too. So thank you. As Brian mentioned, we were talking the other day and I said, I'd really like to just come and allow you to put a face with a name. So I am the theater arts educator at Triton High School. I am the newly appointed visual and performing arts coordinator. And we're just super excited about all of the things that we have going on. As Andrew mentioned, the pep band coming back. And then I wanted to officially invite you all to hopefully join us to come see Frozen, which is the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. We're super excited. As you know, we're one of 52 schools across all of the countries and territories in the United States to produce Frozen. And I wanted you to personally be able to come and see how we've really connected to Frozen's theme of love as an open door. Echoing off of what Andrew said, we're really trying to bring the three communities together. And one of the big pieces of this that we're doing that we're super excited about is we're bringing over 600 elementary schools, 600 students, not 600 schools, 600 students from the elementary schools. And we're targeting the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders because we really want to show them what the hard work is that can pay off because they got those new instruments and now they have chorus back into the school day. So we really are targeting 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. We're busing them over. I've been working with Brian and Kyle to get the kids over to do a special matinee performance for them so that they can see if they stick with band, they stick with chorus, they stick with drama, what will pay off. Because really what we're trying to do with the oncoming of Mr. Kemp is to create that culture of at Triton, this is what we do. We do the arts. And when you come to Triton Middle School, you're going to continue to do the arts. When you come to the high school, you're going to continue to do the arts. And so we know that the older students are really influential on the younger students. So we are super excited to have that special elementary school matinee for them. And we're just hoping that that shows our commitment to the younger students and being able to bridge that gap and hopefully partner with Mr. Forget to continue to see a rise that we've already seen when those students got those free instruments and it was free to them. So we're already seeing that. And we hope to see that again, it's going to take 5 years till those students, come up. And so we're hoping to continue to see a rise in those numbers so that we can prepare for them when they come to see us. Additionally, as Andrew said, we are also partnering with Student Council. We are going to have a Stuff the Bus fund drive. So if you bring 10 cans of food, people in the community can come. They can give 10 cans of food and they get a free ticket to come see Frozen. So we're partnering with them. And they also will get points as being part of the homecoming. And then I'm partnering with Ms. Bolio to also make sure that our drama students are going to games, senior nights to support those athletes and other activities so that we can all continue to show that it doesn't matter if you do the arts or you do sports or you do some of the other activities we have going on, that we're all one community. So thank you all for your time this evening. I just wanted to say hello so you could put a name with a face, and we hope to see you at the show. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie.
The next item is the CPAC update. I'm very happy to welcome Triton's Special Education Parent Advocacy Council Board officers to the meeting tonight to provide an update on their work and upcoming events. Could you please introduce yourselves before we begin?
Hi, Linda. Hi, I'm Maura Fitzpatrick. I'm the Vice Chair of the CPAC Committee, and I'm joined by Danielle Blades.
Thank you. Also Treasurer of the CPAC Committee.
And our Chair, Alicia Davison, couldn't be here tonight, but we just thankful for having a few minutes on the agenda. You know, we haven't been a very active CPAC for the last year or so, but we're trying to change that. We're spending a lot of time trying to put some initiatives in place. There's only about 39, 40 members of the CPAC in a district that has probably 400 students on an IEP. So we have a lot of work to do to get the word out and help people understand that there is a CPAC. You know, our role is really to support caregivers and parents, let them know they have, you know, peers and people they can talk to and get support as they travel through their journey. We're doing our first coffee and conversations this Friday at New Kitchen and Newburyport, so we're excited about that. We're going to be setting up tables at the Frozen she's gone, production, thanks to Principal Patrick Kelly, said we could do that. So really just trying to let people know who we are, what we're up to, and try and increase that membership. So thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for the CPAC? And as you see up there, they've put together a slide of their upcoming events. Thank you very much. And you can more than welcome to stay the whole meeting if you like.
For a little while. I don't know how long we'll stay.
The next item is the FY23 budget year-end report. I would like to welcome Triton District Treasurer Kevin Mahoney and Director of Finance and Operations Kyle Warren for an update on the close of FY23.
All right, perfect. Thank you kindly. So that time of year, again, already, we like to have this presentation each year just to, as a little refresher on the structure of the Kevin's position, the cash management process, also going over where we've been and where we're going. So if, let's see, jumping right into it, the presentation itself is similar to years prior. I think it's worked out well. But Kevin will jump into the cash management process, looking at each of the institutions, the reconciliations, things of that nature. Our most recent Moody's credit opinion, the report itself, will give a brief overview, and then I'll take it from there, going over the year-end close from FY23, specifically the current reserves, stabilization, OPEB, and then other balances we have, as well as what the future's looking like, long-term financial planning. So without further ado.
Thank you, Kyle. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be back. Nice to see you. Just a brief overview of my role here at the district. Of course, I report to the school committee. I work collaboratively with Kyle in the business office, but my work is pretty much independent as it relates to transfers of funds, reconciliation of all bank accounts. So that is done separate and distinct from those that are actually processing payroll and processing our accounts payable warrants. So we do have my role is basically a sort of a checks and balance in terms of the cash management. It keeps the business office folks from getting involved in the actual handling of the cash management. We do have an assistant treasurer that we appointed, that the committee appointed back in fiscal 23, just to add as just a backup in the case of an emergency. But all of our funds are interest-bearing and investable accounts. We have 3 main banking institutions that we do business with. Institution for Savings has 6 of our accounts, many of them checking. We do have our stabilization fund account there. We're going to talk a bit about the stabilization fund account later on in our presentation. That account gives a competitive money market rate of just over 3%. We wanted to keep that stable in liquid at a high yield rate in order to grow that, and you'll see how that can impact in a positive way moving forward. We also have a payroll account and our employee flexible spending account, as well as a money market at Eastern Bank. And again, our checking accounts are earning 0.25%. So there's not much return there, but our money market account at Easton's 3.8%. So we try and concentrate, obviously, most of our available funds in the money market. We also have 2 portfolios that are professionally managed for our OPEB fund and our scholarship fund. As it relates to our cash management policy and the guiding principles are safety, liquidity, and yield. That's what we base all of our decisions around deposits and investments. Back in March, you may recall that the regional banking industry was negatively affected by the failure of the Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank that were perhaps overinvested in certain sectors, among other things, that caused the whole regional mid-sized banking sector to be under significant scrutiny by investors, regulators, and depositors. And so when we reviewed our positions on that, Institution for Savings has the basic FDIC insurance up to $250,000 on balances, but they also have DIF, Depositors Insurance Fund, that insures any balances in excess of the $250,000. So from Institution for Savings, our funds there were fully insured. Eastern Bank did not have DIF insurance, so we were only covered at the time under the FDIC $250,000 maximum amount. So we worked with Eastern Bank and moved our excess funds into a pooled collateral product so that every night our excess funds over $250,000 get swept out of the account and moved into a joint collateralized pool of other institutions that basically have excess capacity in their insurance limits to accept funds from other banking institutions, so that it spreads that risk, increases our insurance profile. So at this point, all of our funds are insured as a result of that move. So I just wanted to assure everybody that our funds are safe. Of course, our portfolio funds are subject to portfolio activity, investment activity, as the market dictates. So those are my comments on this slide. If there's any questions from the committee members, or? Okay, great. We'll move on to the Moody's credit report. Many of you who were here last year saw this before. We haven't had a credit opinion since back in 2020. There's been no need to. We haven't had any type of debt financing, any refinancing of existing debt. So the value of going back to Moody's right now does not necessarily really do anything for us. But at the time, it's worth noting that the report that came out prior to the most recent report of 2020 was also, it was noted that there was a negative outlook on our rating back then. So when the report was released back in 2020, the negative outlook was eliminated, which was a positive sign. We maintained our A1 rating. And what we're looking to do is try and improve upon that as we move forward. So given our optimistic prospects about being able to be accepted into the MSBA program, we want to be mindful of where we are as far as our credit rating goes. We work with a financial advisor, Hilltop Securities. They've been our financial advisor for a number of years. And a lot of what we're recommending here tonight was a result of conversations that we've had with them, because they're well aware of some of the elements that the credit rating agencies consider when looking at bond ratings. So, any questions on that slide? The next slide is,
1 second, Narissa. I have-
sorry.
Kevin, can I just ask one quick question? So we're hoping to have, obviously, good news from the MSBA in December about a potential partnership down the road. At what point do you think going back to the credit rating agencies would be prudent if that does come through?
It will not be immediately. We need to, start to go into the process of, the feasibility portion. It'll be as we start to plan our borrowing. Whether we decide to go in, we would probably go in just when we're going to do our first borrowing. We'd want to set that up with them, to go through their review. But we'll be working closely with our financial advisor to position ourselves in such a way that we'll be able to present the district and our communities in such a way that will influence in a positive way our rating.
In terms of years too, so looking at some surrounding communities, right? So Pentucket, as they went through the construction process, they had short-term notes throughout that process, and then they had that long-term bond right at the tail end of the process. So it would be a few years for sure.
Okay, thanks. I was just, given that this is essentially 3 years old at this point, and I know we're relying on Hilltop, I just, it's always kind of like that wall that's sitting there, like we don't know what's on the other side of the wall. So I was just curious about kind of when we get to know, potentially, if things are moving forward, what's on the other side of the wall.
We had that discussion with Hilltop. We said, should we do it now so we know where we are? And basically, Hilltop said, well, that's what we do for you. Why pay to have a full credit review that's going to go out into the market, but there's no bonds associated with that credit rating, so it really doesn't give us any value in terms of our place in the market.
Very fair. Thank you.
So please excuse me if you already said this to Narissa, but did you say how long it takes them to come back with their evaluation once we do ask for a review?
It's not typically long because we're trying to, as part of our borrowing schedule, we will have in there an adequate amount of time for a credit review. And it doesn't take very long at all. It's typically a conference call. The district will gather a considerable amount of information and submit it to them, mostly related to fiscal policies, looking at reserves, some of the fiscal practices that we have. We'll gather that, we'll submit that. We'll go through an interview. They'll look at some of the financials, not only the financials, they'll look at the demographics, they'll look at enrollment, they'll look at the district history. And then they will issue a credit report. So it's not typically that long.
And just to note, we know exactly what drives our rating and our favorable outlook. So as long as we're steering clear of the things they said right in that report will hurt us, and moving towards the things that will help us, it is a science.
And some of those factors are on the screen right now.
Perfect segue.
So, we see some of our strengths: low debt, stable tax base of our member towns. Their credit rating influences greatly our credit rating. So we benefit from that in terms of some of their demographics. And some of the challenges, again, is like trying to build reserves and some, at the time, declining enrollment, again, based upon our demographics. So we're looking at our strategy that we're going to talk a little bit about is trying to continue to build our reserves as the school committee adopted a couple of years ago as a policy. And Kyle is going to go through that now just to see where we are today and where we see ourselves going forward.
Perfect. Thank you. So jumping right into there, a little update in this presentation from last year's. We felt it was important to delineate reserve balances versus other balances, so to say. So reserves being our OPEB trust, our stabilization, our excess and deficiency E&D, whereas other balances like our revolving funds, our fee-based programs are really to offset operating expenses, whereas reserves are for future unknown costs, capital costs, or OPEB, which is OPEB, almost like a 401k type thing. So starting at the top there, OPEB, haven't seen a lot of activity there. At least we haven't lost money over last year, just with the market conditions, bumped up slightly from 11,000 to 12,000, I believe it was, as part of the funding plan that was adopted by the committee last year before. The first year that will be contributing a $75,000 contribution over to OPEB is in FY26. So certainly hoping to continue moving in that direction. Stabilization, though, a little bit of a shining star in the whole scenario, is if you go right to the bottom of the page or the slide there, you can see our balance as of the end of September is just about 1.6 million. The growth in that amount was last year we had contributed $1.5 million as a contribution through both, yeah. And then this year we had contributed in FY24 $75,000, layering on the interest earnings over that period of time has now gained a substantial balance, right, in just a year. So that's pretty exciting to see. By structure, again, the stabilization fund requires a 2/3 vote of the committee for use. We have these funds earmarked unofficially for a feasibility study as part of the middle school, high school project. And it's key here, too, to continue adding to this balance, both because of inflation and the costs of feasibility studies, as well as long-term growth in the fund for unknown capital costs, right? Yeah. In terms of excess and deficiency, the last type of reserve, intentional reserve there, can see we have a 5-year history of the certified E&D balances. E&D by structure or design is the excess and deficiencies of our general operating budget. So any unbudgeted revenues or favorable revenues that come in, any unexpended appropriations at the end of the year that flushes through to that balance. You can see FY22, we had a certified balance of 1.1 million. After that point in time, we shifted or transferred $500,000 over to the stabilization fund. $90,000 of E&D is used every year to offset our debt capital assessment to the communities. So if we look at the difference between FY22 and the estimated FY23, the shifts are those two reductions, and then an addition of approximately $200,000 because we had favorable revenues in FY23 for Chapter 70 came in a little higher than we anticipated, as well as our regional transportation reimbursement. And then by statute, E&D cannot exceed 5% of our operating budget. So shared there, what our cap would be to date is 2.5 million. If we exceeded that cap, we would have to return the funds to our 3 communities. Any questions on reserves? And then the last piece is the funding plan. Changed this from last year where we had designated year 1 through 4. Now we're in FY24, we kicked off the initial year of implementation. We added what the actual fiscal years of those contributions would be, starting with the stabilization fund, and then in FY26 shifting over to the OPEB account with the goal of a $150,000 contribution in each of those, to each of those funding sources, those reserves. In terms of other balances, revolving funds, the largest that we have, or the greatest amount of activity, is our circuit breaker revolving fund. Special education costs. So this is a structure where the state will reimburse us for tuition 75% of all tuition costs in excess of a particular amount, usually about $45,000, $50,000. Also recently, we've been receiving reimbursement for transportation costs as well. Unfortunately, well, in terms of history there, over the last few years, we had the opportunity to grow that balance, which proved to be incredibly helpful in FY23 and will be helpful this year as well, where we did see in the special education environment as a whole across the state, just increase in tuition costs and increase in transportation costs. So we unfortunately had to dip into that balance between the start of FY23 and the end of FY23 utilized about $500,000, and at the close of the fiscal year, we carried over $600,000 available to be used in FY24, the current fiscal year. And at the bottom, also have the remaining larger primary revolving funds. At the start of the FY23, we had been carrying about 3 months' worth of reserves in each of those. With a challenging fiscal year that we faced, those revolving funds now carry about between 10 and 20% of their annual operating budgets in each of those funds respectively, with the exception of preschool. In Kids Club, actually, we're hanging on to just about 10%, but last year where we did recommend, and it was voted by the committee, to revise the rate structure in preschool and Kids Club because we are incurring significant losses. We're already seeing the trends this year where we're not losing money like we were before. But they did, unfortunately, we did see those balances thin a bit. Any questions? Lastly, unfunded liabilities, real quick, OPEB, big number, huge actuarial assumptions. I mean, right at the start, 81.1 million as of 6/30/22. That was a decrease from 98 million. We didn't transfer a dime into that OPEB trust fund, but because of changes in the market and the discount rate, it yielded that significant of a change. So it's there for comparative purposes, but we do have that plan to start contributing in FY26. And then pensions, Essex, MTRS is our teaching staff, Mass Teachers Retirement System. We're not responsible for that liability. It's funded by the state. Essex Retirement is set to be funded through It's funded through FY 2035, annual appropriation of about 1.7 million, which is challenging, but hopefully in FY 2035 that'll decrease significantly and we could kick that appropriation over to OPEB. Last slide, where are we going? So like Kevin highlighted, once we have the middle school, high school MSBA project timeline solidified, we'll want to continue to meet with our financial advisors, carve out the path, and then ultimately have an additional credit opinion completed by either Moody's or S&P. Also, when we look at the middle school, high school project, we'll ultimately need to procure a feasibility study that lays out the design options, just like it's described, a feasibility of all different paths we could go on with a potential project. We have the 1.6 million set aside to date in the stabilization fund. And then lastly, continuing our commitment to that long-term financial policy, the layered funding strategy that was implemented last year. Even beyond the utilizing the stabilization fund for the feasibility study, to have balances in that stabilization fund is essential for the capital needs of the district. Stop there. Thank you for.
Does anybody have any questions?
So Kyle, do you know if we had a significant change in who signed up for the kids club, the after school, based on the structure change for the pricing at all? Like the impact that we had on the community?
You want to speak to that, Anna? Or
So we did have a significant decrease in students at Salisbury Elementary. many of them were getting care at the Boys and Girls Club instead, so we do have lower numbers there. And then I think at Pine Grove, similar. So they have about the same number as past years.
And with those shifts in enrollment, we've also shifted the staffing at each of those schools as well, so that we can not incur losses as well.
Anybody else? Thank you, Kyle.
I just want to say thank you to both of them, right? We like to spend our time, well, obviously your three roles, the budget is one of them, but we like to spend our time talking about educational matters as an educational institution. So it's nice to have the two of them with Kevin and Kyle making sure everything is in order. So thank you both. Much appreciated.
Thank you. The next item is the DCC meeting update, the FY24 assessment request. I'd like to handle the DCC meeting update and the letter from Rowley about the assessments together, as there was discussion at the meeting. The DCC was last Thursday at Newbury Town Hall, and it was well-attended with 2 Select Board members and 3 Finance Committee members from Newbury, 2 Select Board members and 2 Finance Committee members from Rowley, 3 Select Board members from Salisbury, Erin, Narissa, myself from the school committee, along with Brian for the district administration. The assessment letter was one of the primary discussion points. Rowley is looking at Triton's cherry sheet estimates on revenues from Mass Department of Revenue and would like assessments decreased based on those numbers. The superintendent gave a good overview on that at the DCC meeting, so I'm going to ask him to repeat that now. We can discuss a course of action to respond to the letter, and then the 3 of us that attended can talk about the other discussions that were had.
So to briefly review the letter that was received, there's an attached spreadsheet, and it details the overages of Chapter 70 assumptions from the cherry sheet. Again, the cherry sheet is the summary that is produced by the state that tells us our charges and our receipts. It includes both Chapter 70 and regional transportation. Chapter 70 is a real figure, right? The reality is that we knew we were going to get $66,720 more by the end of the year when the budget was passed, state budget. When we passed our budget in March, we assumed the $30 per pupil, which was roughly $66,720 less. So even though so first of all, that's a real number. That very likely will be a revenue, as Kyle mentioned, both regional transportation and Chapter 70 came in higher, so that filters through to excess and deficiency. We then have, that gets certified to the towns, and we have an opportunity to decide what those funds look like for the future. The second total there is an increase of $130,000 in regional transportation. That is not a real figure, right? The reality is that's a reimbursement program similar to Circuit Breaker. The value of us having been able, in the past, had been able to build that Circuit Breaker balance was that it gives us a predictable number to budget for the future. Like Circuit Breaker, the Department of Ed says, just create a revolving account or a stabilization account for transportation and just put a year's worth of revenue in there. Easier said than done. So that number is based on last year's assumptions. The legislature produces or creates a budget with a big number, call it $100 million. We don't know what our actual percentage rate will be until everyone completes their end of year report, which is happening now from last year. They do spot audits and checks, and then everyone's costs are going up. So what's happened in recent years is the actual amount we get for revenue is less than what they project. So we have never increased or adjusted, I should say, our assessments to towns in the past for that very reason. Chapter 70 is a real number. We could reassess and reduce, Salisbury by, call it somewhere in the mid-20s, upper 20s, Rowley in the low 20s, and Newbury in the very low 20s or upper teens. That's not real money. if we were to be able to refund, if you will, that full 196,000, that would be real money. The bulk of that is not a number that we can depend upon. So it would be fiscally irresponsible to make an assumption that that 130,000 is going to be real money. If it is, great. It filters through to E&D, like Kyle mentioned, which has been the process that's always been in place. It's a number that gets certified to towns. It's not secretive. If it's over 500,000, we have to use 90 to offset the stadium capital assessment. So the money does go back to the towns either way. Now is not the time to be able to do that.
Does anybody have any question on the letter from Rowley? The other,
Actually, I
Oh,
was
sorry.
just curious to see what the response of the other two towns was to the letter.
I mean, I would say there really kind of wasn't one. It was sort of Brian explaining what he just explained, that Chapter 70 is real, but the regional transportation estimate is not. And then it was this is a point of discussion, so it's not, it wasn't a DCC conversation because there were only 3 of us there and nobody had decision-making.
and Ronnie from Salisbury just said this is the same letter that Rowley tends to send every year. And the other
I think
two-
that was about the assessment cap.
Yes.
That was different.
Oh, okay.
But Neil chimed in and asked a question about our access and efficiency, and we talked about Moody's ratings. So there was a discussion, but there was definitely not another single, yes, we should do this, this seems logical around the table.
Yeah, it was essentially, Brian did his discussion, and everybody said his explanation seems reasonable, and it pretty much ended right there.
Right. And the next item was that Larry White wanted,
Can we go back first? Because I think there's the question of, do we actually respond to Rowley's letter, right? So, I mean, I think there are options here, like we can we received it and we can let it sit. We could respond to it, and our responses could vary depending on what the committee wants to do, right? Or you could go beyond a letter and do some sort of other response, but I think we need to figure it out, because I'm not sure right now, based on what was, what the inclination of the committee is to do.
Yeah, I think we need the inclination of the committee, but I think it's good to respond, right? I mean, if it's correspondence, there should be a response, whether you charge me to respond or you charge Linda and I to draft a response back or whatever.
Not responding is a response, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I would say respond
Yeah.
as a response rather than not respond as a response. But I don't know what you would respond with other than what was already stated. So I guess that's my question, do you just put that in writing in another, I don't know if there's another response beyond the one that you just shared.
Yeah, I think if you agree with me, then yes, that's the response. The response was given at the table, and I do think that with the added, we'll call it attention to making sure that all towns have 2 representatives from the select board and representatives from the finance subcommittees. Salisbury it was a good discussion. They have a warrant advisory committee that doesn't function as a finance subcommittee. So there isn't a function for them, as Neil described. Literally, it's reviewing the annual town meeting warrant rather. So all the representatives are coming and are engaging in discussions. So I would hope that would communicate back out. But I think if the board, the select board in Rowley sent a letter, a communication to you as the committee, then you as the full committee, through Linda as the chair, it makes sense to have a direct response. Again, yes, a lack of response is absolutely a response. And it may be the same response as we're writing in the letter. However, I like the idea of a letter.
and I think the response is probably just going to be the same response that we gave to them at the DCC meeting.
So I think the open item is the Chapter 70, right? So regional transportation is an easy one to say, it's not real. Chapter 70 sort of is the conversation, right? Do you say, okay, there's $60,000 more, and yep, as a offering of gratitude and appreciation, we're going to make a token drop of that amount? Or do you just say, like, it's going to be a rough year? The goal is that flows to E&D and then would offset your capital expenses down the road. And I know because Rowley still has that $500,000 sitting out there from town meeting, right? That's the difference. That's what they're looking for here, is to say, it's not 500,000. Triton said, there's whatever, X amount revenue, so now it's 480,000 instead that needs to be voted to complete Rowley's budget in the spring. Does that make sense? Do you want me to rehash Rowley's? Okay, so yeah. At Rowley Town Meeting, their line item, they vote their budget as an article, right? The Triton line item, they decreased by $500,000. Tried to say, like, let's amend it because at that time, the other two towns had said, and one in fact had already passed, I believe, the budget. It only requires 2/3 of approval. Salisbury was saying it's going to pass. That would have been approved. It puts Rowley on the hook for it legally. So they have to pay that $500,000. So if a future town meeting doesn't appropriate that money, then the town would have to decrease its budget lines by $500,000 for this year, this current year that we're in. They stated that their intent is to hold that vote in the spring town meeting, which is typically like the last week of April, first week of May.
So Narissa, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
So we gave them a figure and
Yes.
told them what it was going to be.
Yes.
And they chose to vote a figure that was less than what we said was going to be. And they're
Correct.
holding their hat on the fact that they voted the lower number and they're not going to pay it.
And there was also an amendment.
Or they have to find the money from somewhere else to pay for it.
They have to they have to pay those, right?
They have to pay. 'cause
They
it
have to
was
pay that.
2/3 vote.
Because it was approved by the other two towns. So if they don't pass that $500,000 at the spring special town meeting, then they're going to be making some pretty drastic budget cuts, likely. Kyle's the ex. I don't know if they have any other options. Right? I mean, that money has to come from somewhere, and if they don't fund it, then it has to be cut from someplace. And if you're talking about making cuts with the end of the year being June 30th, and it being tail end of April, early May, when they're holding that town meeting, that's a hard time to find $500,000 in your budget.
They could pull it out of reserves, but
They
the
need a town
starting
meeting
point.
vote, I believe.
Right,
so.
but either way, so
Yeah.
they could pull it out of,
Yeah, yeah.
at
Yeah, yeah.
that meeting, they could pull it out of reserves, but they
Correct.
know their starting point for fiscal '25 is that. So they've got to make that up at some point.
Go ahead, Paul.
Finance Subcommittee and Kyle, how are we doing on our year-end projections to date?
Well,
How are we doing with our expenditures and what we projected based on our budget?
For this year, FY '24, we currently are under a spending freeze. There are areas where we're looking at some significant overages, largely around special education costs, tuitions, transportation, things of that nature. So it's looking a little scary right now. So to the point I think that you might be making is we implemented that spending freeze in middle of October, as soon as the signs pointed in that direction to try and yield savings in other areas. If ultimately by the end of the fiscal year, we don't have enough savings, then we would we would need to go to the committee for a vote to use E&D to balance our budget. The challenge there is it's a very poor reflection on your credit rating ultimately. And then like Brian shared, the next year you have to make that up. So it's.
And again, so revenues, we can't expend, I'm making this number up, $49.5 million on our expenditures. That's the most we could spend. We could get an extra $10 million in revenues. We can't spend it because the town's authorized and appropriated that $49.5 million. So The greatest danger is if any revenues come in under, we require on other revenues coming in over. And, right, the term 9C cuts has been floated around where the state revenues are not, the tax collections are not looking as rosy as they did over previous years. So the number is, my phone locked, I had it on the calculator, $21,510 is how much we would give back to Rowley of that 66 point something million of the Chapter 70. I think, as much as I love the idea of an olive branch to say, we get it, we understand, I think we need every penny we have now, because we don't have a choice but to, as Kyle said, if we said we're spending 49.5 million, we can't spend a penny over, so we have to figure out a way to cut other areas. And then it's even worse if our total revenues are less than we projected. We have to automatically, before we even get to that 49.5, reduce our spending. So by law, we have to spend, we can't spend a penny over that amount. So it's just, given the impact of $20,000 and what that could mean for us in closing this, what is turning into a more difficult year by the day, I certainly wouldn't advise it.
So it sounds like to be fiscally responsible and do what we need to do to make sure that the school continues to run without slashing things is we should wait it out. And if we end up seeing that we have the overage, putting it towards the stadium assessment.
It would flow through to E&D.
Right, that's what I mean. So then they would see potentially a difference in what the cost would be.
To your point, yeah, because every year the policy states that we have to utilize 90,000 of E&D to offset. If we didn't have an increase in E&D, so I mentioned early in the presentation before how because we had favorable revenues that grew the balance. So if we didn't grow that balance through favorable revenue results, then every year we're going to be reducing that balance to zero or below $500,000 because of the policy, to your point.
I think there's also the danger of setting that precedent and creating volatile situations where every year we're looking at changing the budget and sending that back.
And on a municipal level too, with the state looking, it's a little different for regional school districts, but if the state looking at your budget to actual results from a revenue side sees that year over year, you are not conservatively budgeting your revenues and they're thin, you're either hitting it right on the mark or under, that's an area of concern for them. And where they'll come in and start looking at processes, not saying a takeover, but that is financially irresponsible to budget your revenues extremely thin.
Does anybody have any?
Can we revisit it in the spring, like they're going to revisit our budget in the spring? No, it's over?
I think the technical answer is we could, until we collect their final assessment, we could adjust their assessment, right? Because it's not.
But I don't think we can because we'd have to amend our budget and then we have to give them the time frame, right?
But they don't, because it would only be revenues. We're decreasing their assessment, right? So the bottom line isn't changing. We couldn't change the 49.5. Right, so when we voted to use 500,000 of E&D to go into stabilization, we increased our revenues by 500, we increased the operating by 500. That changed our actual operating budget. That needs town approval. If we're just you can decrease your assessment at any point in time. Not a suggestion you should, but yes, it could be revisited. We can double check that, but my take is you would be able to do that up until that. Okay, refund them right at any point, but until we make they make their final payments of $1 million in June, that could be offset by that amount, right? Yeah. Do you agree? Yeah.
Because
If it was available.
Because your budget is what you vote for appropriations, and then you have a balanced budget.
Yeah.
But this would just be changing the buckets of the revenue sources, so to say.
Yeah.
the bottom line number stays the same, just the components are changing.
And I do think it's also worth, I think, the response from the towns. I mean, it's different, right? So if we were to remember back, those of you who were here, when the minimum local contributions changed, and so technically the budget, when it passed at the state level, the cherry sheet, everyone's minimum locals swung, and there's a whole mechanism now where we can reassess, but only if the towns that would be disadvantaged agree to it. So this is different, right? Everyone would be getting money back. They'd be getting a refund check. But I think it's worthy, if you were going to consider that, formally asking the towns to say, would you like to get a refund of if Rowley's 21, Salisbury's probably 29, making this up, and Newbury's probably 19, something like that. Would you like to get that money back, or just leave it and let it finish out the year and make sure we don't have to come back and ask for more money and let it flow through to E&D? I think it's part of the same discussion.
One item too, just want to before we move forward with a refund of that nature, I'd like to pass the question by our financial advisors as well to see how this would impact our credit rating going forward, especially if it became a routine practice.
I guess where we're at in the year, like, it doesn't make, I don't see any financial reason that this makes any sense for us right now, because as Kyle said, we may be using that money. Like, yes, maybe the state is sending 66,000 more to Triton through Chapter 70, but we're also seeing other fluctuations. And then every time there's a fluctuation, do we revote the budget and revote the assessments? Like, we have changes constantly, and what changes trigger that is, there's a lot of them that happen throughout the year. A high-need student moving into the district is a substantial impact on our budget. Do we revote our assessments every time that happens? I mean, I feel like what we do is what we're supposed to do with this change is let it play out to the end of the year. That's what that 5% cap on E&D is for, so that we can't hoard the excess money beyond a certain point. But we're at 1.5% or something, not 5%. And 66,000 on our 5% cap is, it's 0.1%.
Is anybody else?
I guess I'm the last one to kind of comment on this, but just hearing you, what you're saying is it's fiscally irresponsible. I don't think I can sit here as a school committee member and say, okay, let's not go down the road of actually having it written of what it would do. Are we sitting through a presentation knowing about what our, ratings would be? That I think it needs to go back, in my opinion, to say it is exactly what you mentioned. It's not fiscally responsible to do. I mean, you can term it in a nicer way, but, this is, for that very, the rationale that we provide. But I think we've all made, what I've listened to is very rational reasons why we do this process in the first place, with all the percentages, et cetera, to play with. So I would definitely respond, but with exactly what Brian had outlined, that this is not, if they want to pursue it, that we'd have to go through a financial advisor to determine if this is really fiscally responsible to do.
So I guess the follow-up question to that, to make sure that we know what the message is, or Brian knows what the message is, or Linda, whoever the heck is writing this thing, knows what the message is it a solid no now, or is it we can't make a decision now and we're holding off until the spring? Because I think, it's are they expecting another response, right? Or is it, this is the response and, we're at the point where a decision has been made?
Well, to me, this is like the free cash that the towns have. Our only free cash that we have is E&D. So we're nowhere near the 5% cap that we could have with our budget. So I just think with the amount of money that is on the table here, it needs to stay, in my opinion, it needs to stay in E&D for us to maneuver and do what we need to do during this school year. I don't know if anybody else disagrees with what our response would be to the towns. And again, when I spoke, when we were at the DCC, Salisbury and Newbury had no problem with what Brian had said. The only person who sent a letter was Rowley. Go ahead, Matt.
What's your recommendation, Kyle?
I would strongly oppose sending the money back.
In my opinion, that's the way we should move. And it should be a definite no.
Yep, I agree with that. He's the subject matter expert that we rely on to get this information. So if he's telling us it's fiscally irresponsible, then I would, support that.
Is there anybody else who opposes that decision? And to continue on with what was said there, Larry White wanted us to go to the 3 towns, so we strongly said that the DCC meeting was exactly what the DCC meeting's for, that we have a discussion with all the towns, everybody, the finance committee, everybody at that meeting, and not having separate meetings at the 3 different towns, so that nothing is misinterpreted. So we said the DCC meeting is what that's for. And they would like us to speak about the budget, and we had a whole discussion about, that's what we do every year, that any new expenditures or programs, Brian and his team pretty much lay out exactly why we need those programs or why we have to spend the money. So we just said we will continue to have those discussions at the DCC meeting. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add to that, or Erin?
We also reiterated all of the budget meetings that this committee has and the public hearings that we have and the listening sessions and everything else, and that anybody in the community is more than welcome to come and listen and speak, and when it's appropriate, that we publish those out, and we essentially have, 2 or 3 months worth of budget meetings and discussions that are publicly available for everybody to attend, to make sure that everybody in that room understood that we're not doing this behind closed doors and that we are transparent.
And I think I would add that Brian clarified quite clearly, I think, our role or lack thereof in Whittier's building project, because that is an intense topic of discussion. It was going on when I walked in the room, and I think continued all the way up until the meeting started, and then they jumped back into it in the meeting, and then people left the meeting talking about it. So I think it's important to, keep making that clarification, because there is confusion that our authority is only the appointing authority, that we do not have any overview of the Whittier School Committee or their building project, or really anything at all to do with that building project. And then the only other thing I would add is that Larry also requested to the other 2 towns that they submit a letter similar to Rowley's, the one Raleigh sends pretty much every year, providing this is our Prop 2.5, this is our new growth, this is 50% of it, this is what we believe Triton is coming in at. I would say the representatives from the other 2 towns stated very clearly that they did not believe that that was necessary, that they understand that the purview of the school committee is the work on the school budget, and that they feel like the input that they have verbally through the district communications meetings is sufficient for what they wanted.
It was very well attended, and the people there were going to be committed to making sure that they had people at these meetings to have discussions. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No. I think, as you stated, the other 2 towns were very clear in affirming the role of the school committee, that doesn't mean that there isn't a voice of reason after needs are identified, but we can't start with a number and work backwards. We have to start with the needs, and then, yes, of course, there are times we're going to have to fit within a number. That's life. But I thought it was actually a very positive meeting.
Does anybody have anything else? Any questions or concerns? Okay, we're going to move on to the FY25 budget development. The Finance Subcommittee has been preparing for the FY25 budget season. There are still a lot of unknowns and estimates as placeholders for now, but Director of Finance and Operations Kyle Warren will review what was discussed so far.
So I'm just going to do a little bit of scene setting. So we're going to, it's actually an action item with adjusting the budget schedule. Kyle's going to take you through a document that the Finance Subcommittee, right, already looked at this? Yeah. Ooh, for a second, I just had total deja vu. Finance Subcommittee saw this. I would say the numbers are trending worse than they were when the Finance Subcommittee saw this a couple weeks ago. The reality is fiscal 25 is going to be an extremely challenging year, There are choices we made that Kyle will go through in detail when settling contracts with teachers that we knew would increase costs. There are other areas, as Kyle mentioned previously, that costs have been growing beyond what we expected. We obviously know when a student is placed out, tuitions are expensive. The wild card this year has been NRT's inability to run vans as we normally would have. And so how many different vendors are we using now? 4 or 5 different vendors for special education, and the cost is sometimes 2-3 times the cost of what it would be to run a van.
Okay.
A van. So this is special ed service, where we would have routinely had other vans, where we're sharing vans with other districts, ourselves, group vans. There are situations where the group vans aren't working and we have to spread apart based on student needs. But one of the major drivers is these other companies we're using that are exponentially more costly than NRT. And obviously we're working with NRT on our big yellows, and that's one challenge. It's equally as challenging with all the vans for special ed runs. So I just wanted to say, right, to set the scene that this is going to be, we're going to talk about an adjusted schedule, and I know we probably can take that out of order since it's tied to this, because we're not going to. I had asked Linda and Narissa, and that's why there's a proposed schedule, to consider changing up how we do our budget presentations this year. Our approach as a team is going to be to bring to you needs, and right out of the gate, I can tell you, right, based on this number, we're going to be talking about where we can already make some trimming to get to a number that's even reasonable before we start to get to what might potentially need to be deeper cuts. So I'll stop talking there and let you talk.
Yeah, this is tough to go through, honestly, like you shared. It's going to be a very challenging year to get through all of this. But starting right at the top, looking at what's known, what's unknown, estimates, what the ranges might yield. At the top, that first box is known, set in stone. There's no, that rhymed. No wiggle room there. We have a schedule of every single employee, what they're due for a step and COLA. The first line item is for our TRTA teachers. You see the $1 million right at the top. That's reflective of the COLA for FY25 that was agreed upon in the collective bargaining agreement. Same thing with the instructional assistants, TRTA and the IAs. FY24 was the first year. It runs through, that is a 3-year agreement through FY26, and it's reflective of a 3% cost of living adjustment for each. And then the custodial and maintenance staff is our other collective bargaining agreement funded through the general operating budget. That's an agreement that's running FY23 through FY25, and that had a 2.5% COLA agreed to. You will notice there's not the cafeteria staff there because they're separately funded through the the food service revolving fund, so we don't include any of their salaries, steps, or COLAs in the operating budget. So for the $1,265,064, we're locked in for that amount. The next box, as the title says, compensation estimates. This isn't set in stone. We do have choices that we can make. First one is more so an estimate. So TRTA anticipated column movement as teaching staff achieve additional degrees or additional credits. They can have column movement that comes with an increase in wages. This number is much larger than it has been in the prior years because as part of the new agreement, there was a separate column for a CAGS, a Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies. Thank you.
Grown up.
So the cost associated with movement from a master's degree to, if they achieve a CAGS certificate, is $14,000. So it proved to be a very expensive component of the collective bargaining agreement. So as part of the new one, that CAG certificate was actually moved back, where there's a component where anybody achieving a CAG certificate by the end of this fiscal year will be grandfathered into that old column. So right now, I believe we have 14 staff members who we know about that are in current programs.
Calling by the day.
Pardon?
And more calling by the day.
Correct, yeah. So of this 200,000, about 150 of it is associated with just the CAGS movement. The remaining 50,000 was an estimate for other folks maybe achieving a master's degree or additional course credits.
Just to confirm, so those savings for the future are significant long-term, right? So these are existing people who can make the shift. Long-term, the resetting the CAGS into the 45 is significant cost savings moving forward, as that's where it should be in the scale.
Thank you. The salary contingency line item, every year we have in our budget $150,000 available for if things happen, salary related. If we dip into that in any given year as part of the fall adjusted budget, then we request that be made up in the subsequent year. We have about $28 to $30 million worth of payroll as a whole. So when you look at $150,000 as a percentage of that total, it is relatively small, but it's essential. This year proved exactly why we have that, where to meet IEP minutes, students moving into the district or changes in their IEP, we had to add 6.5 IAs across the district this year to meet legally, to meet our obligations we're legally responsible for these student needs. No choice there. We had to do it. So we were able to use that $150,000 line item this year, and unless that stays at zero in FY25, we would request that be moved back up to $150,000. Not obligated to do so, but it would certainly be prudent. And then the last item there, non-collective bargaining agreement staff, admin, support staff, anyone not in those 5 different groups. Typically, in years past, we've aligned their cost of living adjustment, COLA, with the TRTA. So where they have a 3%, this figure is reflective of what it would cost to provide a 3% COLA to all admin and support staff.
If I can just add to that, so historically, Kyle mentioned that it was aligned to the TRTA. The TRTA, Unit A, Unit B, AFSCME units, non-AFSCME, non-union administrators, for years, it was 1.5% or 2%. It was kind of universal across the board. So we've, to Kyle's point, need to mirror, for example, if you have teacher salaries going up and administrators in buildings that are not going up, if you take the top of the teacher scale and divide it by 183 days for next year, that's their per diem rate. You multiply that times 224, which is a year-round employee. It's a 260-day. If you net off 5 weeks of vacation and 11 holidays, so it's an apples-to-apples comparison. You have principals who are making $3,000, $4,000 more than a teacher. Right? We don't keep people around long if those two are converging, and administrators and other support staff across the board are realizing, wait a minute, what? I could go back and get a summer job and make more money than I'm doing as a teacher now. So we just have to make sure that we're remaining competitive, so not keeping up with those COLAs, and that's administrators, but that's also support staff and all the schools. I forget the total number of people, 75 people, 65 people that are not part of a bargaining unit. But I think it was also important as we put this document together and shared with the Finance Subcommittee, that's an estimate and that's negotiable, right? That is something we can adjust as we go through this process.
Thank you. No, this is, next box is transportation, our NRT bus, general ed, yellow bus transportation costs. So that increase of $37,800 is reflective of level service, keeping everything in place that we currently have. We have 21 yellow school buses budgeted. We're running 19. So there was each of those runs, there was a $10 per run per day increase. That yielded, it's right around 2.6% over the prior year. So that yielded the $37,800 while still keeping those two unfilled runs in the budget. Health insurance. So there is, this is an estimate. We've seen in discussions we've had with reps from Blue Cross, Maya, forums we've attended, there's been a pretty significant range in rate increases that we've been provided with. We chose a number right in the middle. So the components playing into this is increase in pharmaceutical costs. The HR coordinator, Julie Warren, sounds the same, spelled different last name, and I attended a forum the other day where for 2 hours they just talked about the inflation in health insurance costs. They shared that typically in communities around us, 8 to 10% renewals are going to be the norm over the next 2 to 3 years. As a favorable experience for us is we look at a percentage of what our staff members in the district contributes in premiums versus what claim costs are, and our claim costs are less than what we've contributed, so a favorable standpoint, and that's why they shared that our rates would be on the low end. Again, that's so for our health and dental plans for active staff, we included a 6% renewal increase, also flowing into those in that far right column. The total dollar change is changes in enrollment. I think it's becoming more and more evident that our dental plans are pretty favorable because we had how many new? 16 new staff members enroll in our dental plans over the last year. We had 21 new MEDEX plans, which are our retirees. So it's interesting to see those trends. But we'll know more probably in late December, early January, as that's carved in stone for the active staff, those first two line items there. For the increase, the $121,000 for MEDEX plans, our retired staff over 65 years old, that's set in stone as a 7.19% renewal rate. We are basing that off of our current enrollment figures.
Has a question?
Yes.
I was just waiting for you to finish this section. Remind me, are we in a contract for a certain amount of time before we can bid, before we can get another, do we have another year?
Yes, so the PEC agreement is in place for FY '24, '25, and '26, if I'm remembering.
Correct.
Yep.
If everyone agreed in the PEC, we could open up, but it would require all the membership, all 5 bargaining units, to say, yes, we want to put it out to bid. So there isn't a contract with Blue Cross per se. It's a contract for negotiations. It's our contract that binds. If that makes sense.
Okay. And is there any opportunity within the current insurance plan that the different type of products could change? So is there more of an option to offer like a higher deductible plan that would offset, that would
Yeah,
require,
so we do offer a high deductible now. That's part of the offering. Any plan design changes would have to go through the PEC. So it outlines the plan design and the plans we offer. Obviously, if we said, hey, we wanted to offer, a high deductible, lower cost option, and it's one other thing we want to add, I believe we would have to reconvene the PEC. I don't think that would be necessarily controversial, right? People might say, yeah, you don't have to take it, it's one more offering. We could look into that, but I think that would probably be, it would have to be an additional product because the current high deductible plan we have was negotiated as part of that PEC settlement.
And is there any kind of incentive to change, to incentivize folks to take on that plan versus to stick with a more expensive HMO plan in terms of their contribution?
Yeah, so I know they had a tool to try and convince people. We contribute, and I'm not going to remember the exact amounts, is it $700 to an individual and $1,400? So we contribute dollars towards an HSA to try and incentivize that. The product we offer with the match, with our contributing funds, it's close. It's not necessarily cost beneficial. Ideally, you have a high deductible plan that you net cash back in your pocket unless you take on more risk. It doesn't quite mitigate it the way the current plan design is. Last time that we negotiated with the PEC, we tried to get some changes, and it would have been a pretty wild swing in the actual plan design to make that cost beneficial. So again, I think if there was another plan we wanted to offer that was another option, I think we could, as long as it was another option. But I'm pretty sure we have to bring the PEC back.
And we'd have to work out if that option, to your point, is actually offers any significant benefit to this. I'm just trying to think outside the box, because this is, a lot of change. And then I know some organizations put in that there's fees if there's a spouse that has eligibility elsewhere, but they're taking on the health plan through the spouse in this organization. If they have it offered elsewhere, they can, they'll have to pay extra or something like that. That's probably not for this round, but if for the next the next round of renewals, that may be something to look at. I don't think you could change it with the PEC as it stands.
So that would be a fee. So if my spouse has a plan offered, I would pay a fee if I don't go on her plan?
No, it's
an incentive.
It's an incentive.
Okay,
So
okay, yeah.
if your spouse was offered
makes
it
sense.
at their institution, right, and you have it as well, but they come to your plan,
Yeah.
so we pay for that person, you're incentivizing them to stick with their plan.
Yeah,
It unfortunately does separate families, but I've just seen it.
Yeah.
It's become quite
Yeah, we had looked at that probably 2 cycles ago, so 6+ years ago. Gosh, it's probably longer than that, because I believe I was in your role. And we looked at it and made some assumptions, and I think it could have been cost effective. The question comes down to, are those who are currently not on a plan also going to get the same benefit? Or is it people who moving forward were on a plan, right? So you save instant significant dollars if you say moving forward, anyone that comes off of our plans gets this $2,500, right, stipend, versus us spending $21,000 on a family package. But if you're also going to pay the make up a number, 175 people who already are not on our plans, then you first have to cover that $400,000 increase. So long-term, it saves money. It was that entry point, we could never get the numbers to work. And we were working with a consultant at that point, and they were designing and tweaking. But it's a great idea. I love the idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Jumping into the last four here. So the pension contribution, this is Essex Regional Retirement System. We have not received the official notice from them yet of what we're required to contribute. Looking at that contribution is based on an actuarial report they posted on their website. So that has a 6.5% assumed increase. So if, I don't want to get into the weeds here, basically our share of the pie of all of Essex, if we were to say, it's based on our total payroll relative to the other communities in Essex. As long as we stay the same, we would just see that 6.5%. If our payroll increase was less relative to other communities, we'd see a savings. But if it was more, then we would get hit a little bit harder. So included, that 109,000 is reflective of a assumed 6.5% increase, which has been consistent percentage-wise over the last few years. Utilities, we are assuming no additional increase at this point in time. Our discussions specifically about electricity, the net metering credits, the available balance that we have. So we locked in rates for FY25, which is, I think it was a 35% increase in our rates over the current year. However, as those rates increase, we'll be able to dip into that available solar credit balance. So that's why for the year, we'd say, okay, we have significant enough solar credit balance to offset any increase in our rates. For heating fuel, we locked in as well, and it was kind of quirky. We actually have a reduction over the rates that we're seeing right now. So that's a just short of a $400,000 line item with some savings that we see there. There's volatility in the amount of heating fuel, natural gas that we use each year. The fluctuations have been, in FY23, we came within $65 of that budget line item versus 3 years ago, we were 40,000 over. So it felt prudent just to level that line item. Jumping into out-of-district tuitions and transportations, like Brian shared, this number is very difficult to pin down because of fluctuations that occur, whether students who are currently enrolled at Triton and go to an out-of-district placement, or if they shift between placements. There's students who are paying $60,000, $80,000 each for just transportation. We have, if they go to a different, that might go from $60,000 to zero. Similarly, if a placement is $110,000, there are some others that are much lower, and we see those shifts frequently throughout the year. These figures here reflect a 5% increase plus 3 new placements for the tuition line item, 3 new placements with an average of $60,000 each. That's that $243,000 figure. The special ed out-of-district tuitions we just layered on a 5% rate increase. In actuality, based on information we're gathering from those, like Brian highlighted, the vendors we have to go to outside of NRT, we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars over that figure. Like he shared it over the last few days, few weeks, since this was initially presented. We wanted to share the same copy that was provided to Finance Subcommittee, but since that point in time, specifically that transportation line item has increased significantly. And then we've also seen it drop significantly, so it's hard to pinpoint that down, but certainly going to be very challenging. And then lastly, continuing our prior funding commitments, the stabilization fund contribution, an increase of $75,000. That's as part of the policy that Kevin and I reviewed earlier this evening. That's going over to the stabilization fund. As part of the IT budget, we have the 159 plan, where we're moving the Chromebooks away from being grant funded. That's the one-to-one Chromebook program, moving away from being grant funded to entirely in our operating budget. That costs $50,000 annually. We would like to continue that. And then the ESSER COVID relief funds, the last two remaining pieces that we have funded in FY24 is the wellness coordinator as well as the middle school math specialist. The wellness coordinator is a full-time position. The middle school math specialist is a half-time position that's funded. There isn't a benefit package included in these figures because that's already layered into the general operating budget because they're existing staff members, but that's the cost associated with the 1.5 FTEs. And then do you want to take on that net change figure? This hurts, right? I'll take that. It continues to become more challenging. Obviously, when we look at the past few years, the increases that we've had and what the corresponding assessment increases to our communities have been, the challenges that they face on their taxpayers, this is the theme, difficult decisions.
So I'd say that the important thing to note is that this does not assume any changes in revenues, right? So this is an increase in expenditures. So any new Chapter 70, as we get closer in through this process, maybe we learn we can be more aggressive and assume $60 per pupil rather than $30. Maybe we'll learn more about regional transportation and there's new dollars. So there could be a couple $100,000 worth of new revenues. The other factor that we need to wrap our head fully around is, you remember we relied on the circuit breaker to offset out-of-district and tuition increases for the current year, with the understanding that circuit breaker, our circuit breaker balances, knowing that the circuit breaker would kick in on last year's expenses this year. A majority of those expenses started at the very end of last year and continued into this year. If there's a silver lining that Kyle's been talking about, you know, those increases, called a couple $100,000, that's assumption over the course of the full year. That's not spending that's gone out the door yet. But the value is then, if we're increasing that spending and we know that now, I guess I can't say it's September anymore, it's now November, but if that's been occurring since October and there's a full year of cost, all of those assumptions we made last year plus those increases from this year are part of our reimbursement that we'll get for circuit breaker next year. So unfortunately, we're back to where we were historically forever, in that we're going to be relying on the circuit breaker we receive each year rather than a balance. But that number could be a significant increase in revenues that will offset some of these crazy increases. So right now, $3 million and close to $3 million, probably over $3 million at this point, in projected total new expenditures is definitely a larger number than we've seen, I'll go with ever. And so there's runway here, right? We've got time. It's only November. We talked about the change in the overall budget process, in that we're going to be, I think I started, I don't think I ever finished that statement, but rather than having principals come and present individual requests and needs over the course of 3 nights, we're going to come to you proposing that we come collectively to you on one night on the 17th. And it's going to be focused on, here are some needs, right? On this, we need to continue funding that capital stabilization plan at a minimum, right? That has to do with our long-term health of the district. So there are decisions about some strategic new spending, and then likely some reductions as one kind of collective district package. So our thought is that we can certainly update the Finance Subcommittee, currently chatting about, it was currently on the 16th of November, looking to push that to the 30th of November. We would have both a fall adjusted budget for the current year, as well as continued updates, but that we wouldn't then talk about this again in December, that we wouldn't talk about it again at the February budget or the February business meeting, that the next time we give you real numbers would be at that January 17th budget presentation, when we've had another couple months to go through the due diligence to refine the numbers, everything from have a little better clarity around medical and a confirmed number for our Essex County retirement system, clarity around those out-of-district special ed costs, and so forth. So that's the thinking from this point forward, is not that we do this each month in this form, but that the next iteration would be an actual budget proposal. The idea here is getting this on the table early.
I know the state has let us down many times. Is there anything that they're looking at in regards to transportation?
Regional transportation?
Or
So for special education,
district, yeah.
Student Opportunity Act rolled in students' transportation costs for special education services, required special ed transportation, into the circuit breaker calculation, doing some unpacking because apparently there's a different calculation. I don't even know if you have an answer to that, right? It's 57%, but trying to understand that more. Circuit breaker was funded at 75%. Tuitions, transportation was 57%. So the way we understood it, it was transportation gets added on, and if you hit that threshold, you get the 75%. So there's some things that we need to figure out and understand how that's working, because it's not what the common understanding was. So that, I don't see any discussions on the horizon about special education transportation. They feel like they solved all world peace around that with the Student Opportunity Act. There's, the two bills that we talked about, I guess it's been a couple months now. Senator Lewis's bill that would change, we'll just say simply, the mechanics of the formula, that over the course of 5 years would definitely yield new additional Chapter 70 dollars. We would be beyond that minimum per pupil. So that legislation is there. I don't know, Nerissa, if you know, it hasn't taken any leaps. And then the kind of counter proposal there is raising the minimum per pupil to $100 from $30.
I was thinking transportation, because there's only one bus company. I didn't know if there was anything going on about only having one bus company and you pay what you pay, whatever they say that you have to pay.
There are different state agencies looking at that. Yes.
Translation 7 to 10 year solution window.
Say that one more time.
Translation of a 7 to 10 year solution window.
Yeah, I mean, so you're either attacking that from a legislative or a legal, right? Senator DeZoglio has been very clear in going after this. We've been contacted to make sure that the law is being followed. The only other thing to prove is that these companies are actually colluding and deciding who gets which territory. And I think that's a major uphill battle. But I sat on that, what was it, a commission that Senator Tarr appointed me to. And the discussions were about transportation, and we spoke more about how we should electrify our fleets to be more green at a bigger expense at $900,000 per vehicle, rather than talking about kind of the elephant in the room. So I do not see anything on the horizon at this point in time, no.
Great. Does anybody have anything else? Anyone?
Thank you. So I'm not asking for a reaction now, but I'm wondering if we can look at and potentially price trying to bring special education transportation in-house.
So you said I can't react now.
I'm just saying, like, I'm not, because it's a big thought, right?
Yeah.
But I know, I mean, clearly it's a lot easier, not necessarily easier, but less training to get van drivers. We already have some experience having van leasing going on here, so we sort of know how that works. It seems to be the point of pain right now, and a very high point of pain. And while I understand that bringing on more employees also brings on more responsibility, I just wonder if this is an easy, not an easy, but like a brain task to at least walk through and say, could something like this help us out?
Those bus drivers would be much easier to train because they wouldn't need special.
Yeah, they don't need the CDL, right?
And actually, Worcester just did this year, right? They received state and national awards for it, both in terms of how they went about it and then the savings that were yielded. Certainly an undertaking, but a feasible process, and also looking at, like you suggest, multiple components to it, but we could at least see, I think as a starting point, dig into how Worcester went about it and how that might cross over to a roadmap for us
Yeah.
to see if it is feasible.
Worcester did their entire fleet, which I imagine that is like a whole nother thing, but just hearing you talk about, you know, vans at 4 times the cost, I don't know, it's just, it feels like it's a question that we have to do due diligence to, knowing that, you know, for an urban district, like a whole fleet might make sense, but, you know, this might be something that's, can put a dent, hopefully, given that costs are that high. I just don't, you know, obviously there's longer term commitments when you're getting into employees and all that other stuff as well. So I don't want to end up, you know, I guess is there a long-term gain as well as potentially alleviating some short-term pain?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something to look into, and we can do some rough analysis to see ballpark. I mean, I know even if it were to be an approach like we have the 2, I guess they're technically vans, the minibuses that we use for the 18 to 22 students during the day in athletics. It doesn't have to be, that's not home to school transportation, so that's not regulated like school transportation is, so a coach can drive those. So this would be home to school, so it's different. But even if we had a fleet of 5 at our disposal that right, because you think about if you have a fleet of 15, 20, you've got to have radios and communication. If we've got 5, that could be cell phones, right? It's something that certainly we can look at just even on a kind of one-by-one breakdown if there's something worth pursuing. Yeah. Sure thing.
Thank you.
Quick analysis.
And I guess my other question was, are you going to go through the schedule change? Because I think that's, okay, I didn't know if that was still yet to come or if that you were just.
Do you want to do that now? Does that make sense now?
I don't know if there are other questions, I just.
So the proposal in this schedule is, again, consolidating the 3 nights of presentations that would have been the 16th, 17th, and 18th. It's canceling the Tuesday and the Thursday, having all presentations on the 17th, the one night. Then the following week, the tentative school committee meeting that's on the calendar of January 24th, that's currently a tentative. We're proposing calling that hold that meeting, have a budget discussion. By that point, we will have the governor's budget, we'll have state figures, we'll be able to calculate assessments and have a formative, informed discussion looking at the full budget figures that we talked about on the 17th. We would have DCC the following night. That allows you to have a discussion prior to DCC. That's not a change. The proposal here is cancel the Saturday workshop. And instead, the following Wednesday, the 31st, there wasn't anything on the schedule, actually add a budget discussion. And then from there, it's the same schedule. So largely what we're doing is canceling the Tuesday, Thursday, meetings as well as the Saturday workshop. And as of January 17th, meeting every Wednesday until the budget's done. So it's adding 2 meetings, canceling 3, but it aligns better from an information flow standard from the state. So you can see the changes at the top and at the bottom. You can see what the resulting schedule would be.
Earlier, you said that when we were talking about Rowley, that you want to start with needs and not start with a number. And I understand, seeing 3 million there is scary, but those budget presentations are our opportunities to hear from the building principals what their needs are. And so I'm concerned about collapsing those 3 nights into one and losing the time of the year when we hear the needs from the principals, because I think that's, even if we have to then say no, 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 no down the line, at least we've heard it, and then we know what it is that is off the table that we might otherwise want to do because of these cost drivers that we're looking at. And I think that makes advocacy with the community, with state officials, easier, because then we're saying we don't, we can't fund this, we can't fund this because of these things over here that maybe should be the state's responsibility, or these are the things that we would like to fund, but we can't because we know what we're passing. Like, this is what we want to do, what the principals want to do. So that's my concern.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a fair concern, right? I mean, the reason we have the process the way we do, it is unique. It's not normal. Right? Most districts, it's the superintendent meets with all the administrative team, and they come up with a budget and propose it. So I think it's good for you to hear the needs. I think if the starting point were different, I would say that outweighs the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. I think in this case, we know, right? I mean, if we're not going to be able to, the 2.9, that's largely over 3, we can't. There's no way. We had a $2.2 million increase overall and a $1.9 million increase in assessments to the towns this past year. And we know what that was like. So, right, we have to find reductions. So as much as it's important to have that process, it feels unfair to have the principals, and even with the school councils, right? We were talking about that. I've had that conversation kind of collectively and individually to make sure that the school council is aware of that too, because it's unfair for them to go through the process of generating needs and priorities and then come up and say, we appreciate all your time. We actually going to need a list of cuts out of you. It just, given the reality of this year, I 100% agree with you that being important. I think given the nature of the year, it feels cruel to do it that way.
And I just say, I generally feel like that too. Picturing myself in every other seat that has to go through this process though, the only one I feel like that benefits this year is us. And I can't, that was just my feeling, like I can't rationalize the benefit to us when it's going to be to the detriment of principals, school councils, administration that's sitting on this side of the table. Overall, it would be a net negative.
Does anybody else have any comments on the schedule change?
So the only other question I want to ask, because I think you do need to, this is your meeting schedule, so you should vote this. We voted the tentative budget remotely last year, and we had a discussion about, remote, I mean via Zoom. We had a discussion about, it felt like it was a really big decision to do via Zoom. And then the discussion turned towards, actually, Zoom allows more people to access the discussion and be privy to it, even be part of it if they so choose, obviously through public comment. So the question would be, I would love to, if we're going to shift that meeting, which would be February 13th is the tentative budget, remember that's the one we had already shifted to the Tuesday. If we're going to make that remote, let's publicize that now. Because I was, as a reminder, like, I was feeling like it was too big a vote to do remotely, and then you all convinced me that it's actually better to do it remote. So if that's, now I'm a believer, but.
I mean, I think I only heard one complaint that it was remote. And I favor it for accessibility as well, and we're covered legally for it, so I think it makes sense.
And that is solely a budget vote, right? We said we'll do the business meeting on that's the 17th, it would be the 7th, which is the Wednesday prior.
Would you still be hosting the budget drop-in meetings as well? Outside of this, for the public? Yeah. So
We had not scheduled those yet, but,
Yeah.
yep.
So with
So
that
those would be separate.
as well?
Yep. Yeah, so we would attempt to do those, we did those before the public hearing. Or do we do those between the tentative and the?
I think we did them between the tentative and the final, because I seem to remember we had a really tight timing with the public hearing date legally and February vacation last year. So I think it was like the Tuesday after February vacation was the hearing or something like that. It was like on a weird off day. And then later that week was the first drop-in, and then I think we did one other, and then.
So we would do them between the 28th and the 13th. Yeah.
Does anybody have any opposition to this schedule? Can I have a motion to approve the changes to the school committee meeting date as presented?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The next item is the school committee goals belonging.
Did we confirm, so what were you confirming?
I was going to say, you didn't ask for opposed.
You didn't ask for a what?
Opposed.
Is there anybody opposed? Yes.
So one opposed. So you didn't say the virtual on the Tuesday, but I heard virtual on the Tuesday, right? So, okay. Because that was not listed here.
The school committee goals belonging. As an outcome of the goals discussion, a few members volunteered to look at the different options for surveys about senses of belonging to the Triton community. I will hand this to Susanna for one of the options that were considered, and I appreciate you taking this on.
Just getting set up, I think it would be helpful to share some of the materials that were in the, yeah, thank you.
I have it up too if you want me to put it on, if yours doesn't.
Does it?
It should, but it's a Chromebook, so sometimes they play nice with that and sometimes they don't.
Doesn't like me.
Good.
HDMI.
Do you mind if
Pardon?
I drive?
Yeah, no, it's great. There's really only one, well, two areas. Just the main site and then the framework. So while Brian's getting set up, just to recap, when we left the workshop, we had there was a few of us that, Paul Goldner, myself, Linda, you came as well. We came together to kind of look at how we could look at outside consultants, for example, to what kind of survey offerings they have, and then look at the review, kind of like what is their content, what is their scope, and obviously what is the cost. So Where we landed and what we're sharing tonight is essentially an initiative that comes from UMass Amherst. It's called the Education Commonwealth Project, and it basically it's the overall initiative, and I don't want to confuse everyone, but the overall initiative is centered around student learning, assessment, and school quality, and so it branches out, has basically two of those arms. One is the school quality measurement framework, and then the other one is the performance assessment arm. And the two do interrelate by all means, so it's not that, we would not be looking at one, but the obviously the professional, sorry, not the professional assessment, the performance assessment section is something that Brian and obviously Anna would have great more interest than us. It's not, it's really around kind of stuff they can do with teachers, et cetera, in classrooms. So what we're focused on, though, is looking at that school quality measures framework. Brian's brought it up. If you can scroll down a wee bit. There you go. Okay. So really what I wanted to this is what was helpful to me to understand. The framework is built on sort of multiple measures, which include that academic, social, emotional, and social cultural indicators. So what they're essentially doing is trying to define school quality, if you like, from key indicators in these sort of areas. So teachers and leadership, school culture, and resources. And it's essentially saying that the teachers and leadership, school culture, and resources are essential inputs in order to ensure kind of outcomes in our academic learning and community and well-being. So then you'll say, okay, well, how does that relate to any surveys and whatnot? Within those areas, in those categories, as they call them, they have integrated survey materials that would be available to us. They have let me just see what it's called. The Student Perception Survey. Obviously, it's actually very similar when I looked at the items where I could, what was highlighted. Very similar, actually, to the vocal study. I thought was interesting. And then the Teacher Leadership Survey is something that would be administered, obviously, to them. And again, it actually is quite similar to the Panorama survey that we had looked at. So that was interesting as well. So I have a feeling that they have taken kind of a whole universe and put them together and validated. So when we had that workshop, however, I think the conversation was, okay, what do we do for school committee perspective? And that was really around parent and caregiving surveys. And we, obviously, they don't have one right now. But it is in development. So it's in development, and then their intention is, and correct me if I'm wrong, was a couple of weeks ago jotting down the logistics of all of this was, so they would pilot this survey in the spring, next spring. So our option is we could become a school district, a partner with these folks. We would be, I think, the 9th school district. I think there's 8 now, but while they seem relatively small, they're actually really large. I mean, you've got Boston and Lowell in there, and they're extremely big. So we would partner with them. They would administer. We could go in and say, okay, well, we'll partner and go in with the pilot with you as well. We'll let you know. They would administer that survey. How they would go through their platform, which is very similar, obviously, to, I'm not going to say MCAS, but it's like they would go through that, and all the data is collected through Qualtrics, which is, leaps and bounds beyond SurveyMonkey that I think that we had kind of talked about, in the workshop. So it is in terms of data collection and in terms of the study that's gone into this, probably very sound in comparison to sort of a homegrown. This is sort of a lot of research behind it, a lot of thought gone into it. And then once they've done the pilot, there's going to have to be some validation thereafter. But then once that is available, we could then administer it again. And to Paul, Mayette's point is it could give us a good litmus test as to who would respond to begin with, like in a pilot. So then we would then have them administrate it for us again once it's out there, and they would then take so there's no fee, right? There's no financial cost. Let's say that first. There's no financial cost. Obviously, there's some data sharing. We can go through that. They would collect the data. They would review and analyze it with us, and then provide us with various action items as they relate to the frameworks that they've developed here. So if it's an area around school culture, I should say in that area is very much focused on the area around belonging for students. And so maybe the community and well-being section is really where they would be looking at honing in on where we can find the impact of community impact on belonging and how it all turns out into these overall kind of quality measure indicators. So that's essentially how I've perceived it to be. I think both Paul Mayette and Paul Goldner can interject by all means. Like, that's what I got from it.
Have any
There's
comment?
Just appreciated it as a holistic measure of the school, and particularly moving forward, depending on how much further, I know you mentioned being interested in some of the academic measures that are also a little bit more holistic in terms of how they look at that than MCAS is. So it provides, the first steps towards a partnership that could give us a lot of information that would help us just improve the district in a lot of ways. So I think it's a great first foray.
And I thought, compared to some of the other choices, this is an organization that is academic and looking at how do we improve schools and doing it from that vantage point, instead of saying, oh, what product would you like us to sell to you, and then giving us what, it's not that profit motivation, it's the better school motivation. And so I think this is going to be here for a long time and develop and grow, and as the needs of schools change, grow and lead some of that change. So I really liked what I saw.
And what I saw with it was that they weren't trying to sell you anything. They were trying to be a partnership with you and work with you as to what would be the best way going forward. So I liked that part of it, that they can adjust it to anything that you want. So they were willing to work with us. I don't know if you had...
Just to add, we also talked about community, like a larger community survey. That I got the impression that is on the roadmap, but it's certainly it's going to be a much trickier task. Even the parent caregiver one is going to be a lot harder, just by sort of sample, the appropriate sample size, etc., representation and whatnot, as they explained to us. So it is out there. I think that they are looking to that, like we have seen as an important input as well. So I think it down the road would be there too. And again, it would be a pilot, and then it would be and then administered if they wanted to.
Yeah, and I think they did it in a thoughtful way too, because I think with the community, they understood that we have the same issues about giving a survey to our community, so they weren't quite sure how to go about that, and they were working how that was going to happen. So they're having the same challenges that we were having this first initial discussion.
I was going to say, I don't know if we shared out this link to this dashboard, but I don't know if you're planning on making a decision tonight or keep playing, but if you go through, I selected Attleboro and Attleboro High School, which is apparently not in the system. Oh, there it goes. So I'm assuming this was just delayed, and this is Attleboro High School. But there's an incredible amount of data. And so again, this is the student and staff report. And we would have that same level of data, right, if we roll down the road and add students and staff, but even starting off with community members, just an incredible amount of information that you can get just by clicking in. As Susanna said, I think you said leaps and bounds. I don't think that does it justice compared to SurveyMonkey, even on down to the sample questions. So it's an incredible resource to have. And we would be able, she said we would be able to, this is linked on their site, we would be able to have the code for Triton that would link up to our website. It would obviously allow you to get to the site with the others, but it would be our data embedded directly.
I would say some of the stratification that we see in MCAST, for example, age, demographics, all of those are very similar. So we can look across, is this, can you look at it from the, I don't want to say, what is it, low income, perspective? Can you look at it from, English, speaking as English as a, foreign language perspective, that kind of thing, second language perspective. So those, and it's very similar, like I would say the measurement, the definitions are very similar, put it that way, to what we've used to be seeing how, but then the added layer of details that we can get from these surveys to add into this is where we would get.
So I'm not sure how the committee would like to move forward, that maybe we give the link to everybody so that everybody can go on the site and look at it. I don't know what everybody's,
I was going to say, it was in the agenda.
oh, I know that, but I don't know if anybody's, went on it and was able to look at it. And
I did.
right. I know I did too, but I wasn't sure if everybody else had already done it.
I hung out in here for a while the other day, because this is a rabbit hole of amazing. I really appreciate all the research that went into it, because me just clicking the link, and I think I hit every button I could. And it shows you, what I really do like about it is it shows you what the data does not include due to low response rate, and it categorizes it firmly, so you actually know without going through down your own separate rabbit hole what is missing and kind of why, and if that's a key piece of information, you can target it later. And that's something that's been missing when we're like, oh, we didn't capture that. It's actually just telling you we didn't capture that because. And that's huge in things like this. But if you haven't already been in here, this is really impressive.
And just to point out, there is no financial cost, right? I do not believe there's any financial cost, right? Obviously, being a part of any kind of research like this, we would be sharing data. It is all de-identified, though, and it follows the same standards of most surveys, where if it's less than 10 in a sample, they won't report out on it, so it can't be, folks can't be identified. So, I think just having that professional component behind it is, treating it very confidentially.
So is the will of the committee that we would like to go with? This.
I would say I think yes, since no one is speaking up. I don't want to echo everything that Caitlin just said, but I think it's a very impressive set of information gathering and reporting that they put out, and I personally loved that. And I think this checks all the boxes that we were looking for, plus some, right? It goes beyond what we were looking for. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So I'd be ready to say, let's figure out what it takes to finalize something with them.
Do we want to take a vote on this? That we all at least agree that we would like to start?
I would suggest we bring back some information, and I'm assuming there's going to be
A contract,
an arrangement, something. And then that comes back to the committee and say, here's the proposal, here's the timeline. We anticipate doing the pilot by April 30th. So.
My microphone's blinking. Okay, no, that sounds like a plan, and I want to thank the group for evaluating it and being on that call. The next item is the superintendent's report. Superintendent is going to review the report.
Yes, he is. He's just going to get there. Sorry. Quick report. I had noted to you in both my goals and in the district strategy that we're working on the vision of the graduate. It's a typical discussion activity product in high schools. It's become more popular to look at that as a K through 12. We're actually doing a workshop over the course of the year with John and Marianne, who are the co-principals at Nipmuc Regional, which is Mendon Upton's high school. And they've done phenomenal work. And so we're partnering with some neighboring communities who are also in the same workshop, but they're all high school teams. So we're the only K through 12 team. So we'll be doing that over the course of the year and bringing that work. Getting the vision, and as I noted here, I think we're focusing more on the vision of the Triton learner than the graduate, that this is about what we believe and want for our students and what we envision that we expect from them at all levels. So excited about this work. I think it'll be very engaging. You heard Andrew earlier on, as well as Natalie, talking about the high school working on engaging and building community, and that needs to be a district-wide thing. It will forever be a challenge as a three-town region, so even more important that we focus our energy there. Facilities update, just to let you know, we're still dealing with ongoing issues with the mold. Newbury, the auditorium, major, approaching $100,000 repair through insurance with the town of Newbury. It was a major leak coming down into the ceiling. They're setting up scaffolding, removing the ceiling, big repair. There's also room 207 that needed some repairs for a leak. Those, we know the source, the solutions in the works. Room 138 at Salisbury is still elusive, right? Yeah?
Yeah, the challenge is finding what the source of the mold is. The results, the air quality testing that came back from the consultant showed trace, quote, trace amounts of mold in that particular space. There's not a set range of what's safe and what's not safe in terms of a dictated released schedule type thing. The results, what's been shared with us contextually is the results at a trace level can be that of somebody has mold on their clothing, they walk into the room and it emits in that room. A little bit of hyperbole here, but to that degree. We've extensively reviewed that room, sanitized that room, gotten up into the ceiling and cannot find the source. Air quality testing is expensive, so before we have that room retested, we want to find out why. And that continues to be the challenge in that particular space at Salisbury Elementary.
And I think I shared with you last month that you'll remember we had an assessment done at this campus based on a concern raised by a citizen, and the Department of Public Health actually suggests that you don't do indoor air quality testing because it is so susceptible. They came in with their space-age spectrometers and walked through classrooms. And so we've talked about other solutions to look at, because now that the alarm has been raised, there's concern, and I understand that. But we're also talking about such a trace amount that we need expert advice on how to back out of where we are. So that is still a work in progress. So that those spaces, those teachers are relocated, obviously. Sixth grade environmental camp, you mentioned it earlier. Obviously, Newbury and Pine Grove students, Newbury and Salisbury students had their trip cut a day short. But overall, all three schools were at the same camp, and the reports are very positive. It went well. They enjoyed the camp and had a great experience. Frozen the musical, don't need to say anything more other than you have the show times here. And that show is coming up in a couple weekends. And again, one more time to reiterate, we are the only school in the state of Massachusetts that has the authority to offer that show. So it looks to be a great show. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Does anybody have any questions? You're not going to be in the play or anything?
I had made a pitch to be, yoo-hoo, big summer blowout. What's his name? I forget his name. The big burly dude in the woods. I was not cast, just saying.
That's Cam Neary, you can't steal his part.
Exactly, yeah. He so deserved it, but I would have nailed it, just saying.
Okay, can I have a motion to receive and file the superintendent's report for November 2023?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The next item is the policy edits. Mass Association of School Committees has recommended that updates be made to 3 of our procurement policies. This has already been reviewed by the Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee, and the subcommittee's chair, Paul Golden, will provide an overview of the changes.
So the state recently changed laws around procurement, and especially the limit before you have to send something out for bid. And so these policy changes are largely in response to that. There's some other minor changes in terms of, it's not, maybe not minor, but also explicitly saying that we can enter into contracts for up to 3 years, and we have to vote if we're going to do longer contracts than that, 2/3 vote. But you can see in the redlining what those changes are. Don't know if anyone has any questions or would like me to go into more detail, or Brian.
Does anybody have any questions? Can we have a motion to approve policies DJ, DJA, and DJE as presented as a first reading?
I'll make the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Last month, we reviewed the proposed wellness policy changes and approved the policy as a first reading. Could I please get a motion to approve the policy as a second and final reading?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Subcommittee reports, policy and advocacy, Paul Goldner.
We met earlier today and continued our review of the policy manual. Our goal is to get through the whole policy manual every 5 years and review every policy. We made headway today. We'll continue doing all that all year. We will be bringing some policies, Section A, to next month for approval. We're also continuing to discuss a monthly newsletter that would go out through Parent Square. We're targeting February as our first time sending that out and discussing how we will gather community emails.
Thank you, Paul. Finance, Paul Mayette.
We met on the 19th, and the subject of that meeting was more or less everything that Kyle went over between the budget presentation and the spending freeze. So nothing more to add beyond what was said already in this meeting. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for the 16th, but may be being explored to the 30th. Is that still?
We have 2 of 3 confirmed, yes.
Okay, so likely move to the 30th.
Personnel negotiations, Susanna?
We don't have any meetings scheduled anytime soon, next month or so.
Thank you. And before we adjourn, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Have a nice, happy, and healthy holiday. And it always takes a village. I want to thank all of you for everything that you guys do. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Make the motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Have a nice evening.